figure out how do I enable it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. Hello, folks. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear. If you don't, please do mention in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to look into how we can help you. What I'll also quickly do is I'll go ahead and share my screen here so I can run you through the presentation. Again, please let me know, again, if you can confirm if you can see the presentation clearly.
Yep, you can see it. Let's
Okay,
go.
wonderful, wonderful. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for taking our time and joining in today's session. The agenda of today's session is to basically introduce you to Azure at a very high level, giving you an understanding of what is this Microsoft offering, how is it different to what you're currently using and what others are providing. And probably we'll have a quick sneak peek of a quick demo around how to use Azure and probably how to build up a machine in Azure. Right. So it's a very high level session. If you do have any questions, like Evan said, feel free to post it on the chat. I do have a few minutes reserved at the end for Q&A. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask at the end, we can do so as well. So before I go into the details of the session, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Roshan Yelburgi. I work as a solution architect with Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro is a value-added distributor. We have been in the business for several decades now, and we work very closely with partners like Cloud Made Simple. We work with them in building a solution, building an estimation, helping them with any kind of pre-sales activities, and that's where we basically give our value-add services to them. My background on the technology side, I've been a Microsoft guy throughout my life. Started working on SharePoint, then moved to BPOS, and then that BPOS changed to Office 365, and now it's become Microsoft 365. And I've been working on Azure when it was known as Windows Azure. So it's been roughly what 9 years, I would say, right? And I've seen how the technology has evolved and how partners like Cloud Made Simple were one of the first ones to quickly learn, adopt, and take it to the market and have that greater idea of how to bring value to their customers. So that's about me. Now, talking about what is cloud, right? Now, I've made a very simple pictorial representation of it and hope that gives you guys a clearer picture. So cloud, before we go into the cloud, let's look at what is the infrastructure today. So typically, a small customer would have a couple of servers in his infrastructure, usually has some kind of a VPN or a firewall that separates the internal servers to the external world. When I say external world, basically the internet, and users either they access it directly when they're in the office directly on the server, or they're working from home or from other locations, they access via the firewall or via the VPN on to the servers, right? And I'm sure this has been something that most of you have used, are still using, and this has been the IT infrastructure for several decades. Now, when technology firms like Microsoft and AWS and Google came out with cloud, what does that mean? All it means is instead of you having to build servers and take care of them and provide services and update those operating system and application, companies like Microsoft, not just one server, they probably have thousands of servers, right? And what they do is they build a data center and have these thousands of servers running in them. And the server uptime, the server hardware, the server electricity, the cooling of it, the storage to it, all of that is the headache of the provider, which in our case is Microsoft. So it is their responsibility to make sure that all these servers are up and running, all these servers are up to date, all these servers are providing the capabilities that are configured. Now, some of the servers can be giving you just storage. Some of the servers may have applications, and you are giving and Microsoft is giving them access to the application. So in the cloud world, you may not have one user, 10 user, you might have millions of users, and they basically access this bunch of servers, which is now managed and maintained by Microsoft. And that in very simple terms is cloud. So for a customer, you don't have to build any server, you don't have to build any network, you don't have to manage, not build, I'm sorry, you don't have to manage the server, manage the network, manage the underlying hardware of it. All of that is taken away from you. You still need to configure stuff. You still need to put security around whatever you're accessing on the cloud. And that is where you work with service providers like Cloud Made Simple, which who have expertise on managing and configuring and establishing security around it. So I hope what is cloud made sense now. So looking at what is Azure, again, taking the same analogy, Microsoft Azure is basically a set of servers which are ever expanding, which means you can get unlimited supply of server, storage, compute, whatever the offerings that they have to meet your business requirement. Now, if your business requirement is to bring in a new application, which then requires a new server, which then requires a new networking component, you typically order that. But in the cloud world, all of that can be created in a matter of minutes, right? It's the freedom to build, manage, and deploy applications using the massive network of servers and net storage and facilities that Microsoft provides. And all of this is again done using a user interface. You don't need to use PowerShell or coding or use command tools to do it. It is all using user interface. And in towards the end of this session, I'll show you how easy and simple it is to actually create something within Azure. Now we spoke about this massive infrastructure and global presence. So quickly looking at that massive infrastructure that Microsoft has. Now, Microsoft has data centers spread across the globe, right? Now, within Australia, they have 4 regions. Now, what does a region mean? A region basically means that they have multiple data centers in that particular region. So they have 4 regions in Australia. They have Australia East, which is, I would say, Sydney-based region. Southeast is Victoria or Melbourne-based region. They have Australia Central and Central 2, which is more of the Canberra-based region. Now, one region will not have one data center, at least in Australia East and Southeast, they have a minimum of 3 data centers. Now, Microsoft does not disclose the number of data centers or the actual address or the location of the data center. They always mention about the region where it is available, right? So if you as a customer are based in, for example, Queensland, typically Australia East is closest to you in terms of latency and distance. If you're based in Victoria or South Australia, then Australia Southeast is closest. If you're based in Perth or Western Australia, there are websites that can help you determine which is the closest, whether it is East, Southeast, or is it Southeast Asia. If you can see closely here, we even have Southeast Asia, which is Singapore, right? Which kind of becomes a little closer to the Perth region. So there are websites that Microsoft has created. Again, I'll show you quickly one of them, which helps you determine which is your closest. Okay. Now, if you are a customer who has, let's say, offices in Australia, in UK, in US, for example, your head office can be in Australia, but you can still create servers in US. You can still create servers or applications or whatever Azure services require in UK as well. So since Microsoft has regions across the globe, it gives you that flexibility to go ahead and build servers anywhere in the world where Azure region is available, or you can create it in the closest region where you would like, where your users are based. Okay. So at a very high level, this is what it is. Microsoft has the highest number of regions compared to its closest competitor. They have the most number of data centers across the globe. So you are working with the biggest vendor when it comes to the cloud infrastructure. Now, just to give you a very high level idea of the amount of services, again, the slide probably includes 20% or 30% of the services that Azure provides. There are so many more now available. The last time I read it, they probably have a little over 300 services now, right? Now, all these services, of course, they need some kind of data center, right? So this is the data center infrastructure that they have, all servers and operating system and storage and all of those networking components all put in there. Now, based on this infrastructure, you can create virtual machine, you can create some storage, you can create some networking. You can also create containers. You can use Visual Studio to develop applications. You can even do analytics. So if you're a customer who has a lot of data of your customers, and you want to pull some reports in and do some trend analysis, right? So if you're a retail customer and you want to know next month typically which items or which category of items get sold, and you want to see that from the last 10 years, right? So things like these can be done. You pull the data into Azure, you use something like Data Lake, and you run reports on it, and that gives you insight into which product category or which product are users using more when, let's say, when you go into spring season in Australia. Artificial intelligence is the new buzzword now. Microsoft has several AI features and functionalities built which you can use. So they have a whole set of functionalities there, and even identity, right? Username and password management. So just a high level idea of what are the various services that Azure can provide. But you have to understand that at the very base, it is the data center, right? So they manage the data center, they take care of it. And because of they have so much vast infrastructure, they're able to pull out these services and give you services for you to use. So there are two links that are available to find your closest data center. So what I'll quickly do is I'll probably open one of them and show you the data center which is closest to where I'm based. I'm based in Melbourne, by the way. And if I happen to just come out of this and click one of this here. So this is an Azure speed.com, and there are all these regions here. Again, I hope everybody's able to see the screen sharing. If not, please do let me know in the chat. So what I'll do is I'll select East and Southeast because I know these are the closest. I'll also select Southeast just to compare what kind of latency I have. And you see from the network provider which I am using, I'm on the Wi-Fi using a network provider here. I get about 18 milliseconds to Australia Southeast data center. I have about 34 milliseconds and Singapore is about 100 milliseconds. I can select any region. So let's say if I select UAE North and if I scroll down, in a couple of seconds, I would also see, if you see here at the bottom, it says 173, 175. So this is definitely much farther, both in terms of latency and distance. So it's always recommended for a customer when you're working with an MSP, and MSPs, I'm sure they would do this. They always check which is the closest one.
Yeah, that's part of what we do when we're helping you set all this up.
Oh, absolutely. So this is what MSPs like Cloud Made Simple check and make sure, because end of the day, you want to have the best performance possible. So this is one of the ways to check, right? So let's look at a little closer into Azure. Now, I'm sure everybody has seen this slide many, many times. These are the various cloud service models. You have traditional on-premise data centers or traditional on-premise infrastructure where as a customer, you have to manage everything, right? From network storage, server virtualization, all the way up to applications. Infrastructure as a service is one of the hottest commodities that is available today, and a lot of customers are adopting to it. So before I go into infrastructure as a service, I'll quickly jump on to software as a service because a lot of customers are already using this. If you're using Microsoft 365, that's software as a service. Even before Microsoft 365, if you're using email like Gmail and Hotmail and Yahoo Mail and Rediff Mail, all of that is software as a service, right? Because All you need is a username, password. You get access to an application from which you can send emails. So that is software as a service where you don't have to manage anything, even the application itself that is taken care by the provider. Platform as a service is something like website hosting, right? So you still get to decide what data goes into your website, right? What kind of integration you would like to have with your website, like integration with the payment gateway or integration with another ERP solution, things like this. So data and application is something that you still decide, but you don't really worry what operating system is my database server running on, right? You don't really worry about how much storage or what kind of storage do they use? Are they using NetApp storage or HP storage, right? So that is platform as a service. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, you have control right from the operating system level all the way up to the application level. So as a customer, you can decide, do I want Windows or Linux? Do I want which level of operating system? Is it 2012, 2019, 2022, and all the way up to the application? So it gives you more control on the applications. And you don't again have to worry about the virtualization. So you don't have to worry who is managing what kind of storage is being used, what kind of servers are being used and stuff. So what we'll do in today's session is we'll just go into a little deeper into the infrastructure as service. Now, how do you compare infrastructure as service with your current on-prem infrastructure, right? So if I take a couple of blocks from this, the first one is hardware, right? If you're running your own infrastructure in your own office, typically the hardware has 5 years warranty. You can probably extend it, get an extended warranty for another couple of years. So the management of the hardware, the supportability of the hardware, making sure you have the right contracts in place for the hardware is your responsibility, right? In terms of backup, you need to worry about if you need to worry about having the backup infrastructure for the growth of your company, which means if you expect that your company will grow by 10%, which also means that your data will grow by 50%, you'll need to have a backup storage or the backup infrastructure that can handle that, right? So you'll need to put in the storage cost, the backup cost. You'll need to have two copies of the backup within your office and a distant location. So all of that is something that you will have to manage. Scalability. Let's say you want to bring a new application and test it, or you have selected an application and now you have to build additional servers in order to install and configure that new application, which means you have to order for additional hardware, which means also you will also need to worry about whether your firewall can take that load, your network switch can take that load, whether you have the rack space available for it, whether you have the storage available for it. And all of these things, if you don't have, then you'll have to buy all of that, right? And after a couple of years, if for whatever reason the application is not giving you the right results, then you'll have to downscale, right? Which means now you're left with hardware which you don't use. You also have to worry about power and cooling, making sure your servers are running at the optimum level. You'll need to make sure it is giving the right performance, which means you'll have to configure it in the right way. So all this is dependent on you and you running in your own infrastructure. But when it comes to infrastructure as service, hardware is the vendor's headache. So he will worry about hardware. He will worry about maintaining the contract. All you worry is, am I selecting the right spec? Am I putting the right operating system? And am I configuring the right application? You don't have to worry about the performance. You don't have to worry about the scalability or even redundancy. Microsoft guarantees 9 nines SLA, 99 followed by 7 nines SLA when it comes to redundancy, right? So they'll give you the best in class hardware, the best in class performing softwares, and they give you all the security functionalities that an SMB just can't afford, a small business company just can't afford. I mean, again, if you have seen what's happening in the market for the last 8 to 10 months, security is now the main discussion. It is not an optional discussion to have. right? And cloud provides you so many functionalities from an application security, network security, even trusted CPU security. Those things, if you buy individually and deploy it in your on-prem infrastructure, it'll cost you a lot of dollars. But in the cloud world, you get enterprise grade security features at a very nominal price. And you can create these or configure these security features in a very short period of time. And you can always work with vendors like Cloud Made Simple who have expertise in configuring the security, in backup, in helping you select the right performance tier so that you get the optimal performance for all your users. So that's the big difference, right? So you don't have to worry about any hardware failure, any scalability issues, any redundancy, any kind of cost related to backup. Because in cloud, you can take a backup of what is your existing infrastructure. And if your existing infrastructure grows, only then you pay more in the cloud world. So you pay for only what you use. Right? And that's the biggest selling point for any cloud provider. Quickly talking about the networking, I'll not go into too much of technicalities here. So when you build something in cloud, you can definitely access it via the internet. But if this is an application, if this is a corporate application and you do not want users to access these applications via the internet, you want to have a better security model or a confined way of accessing it, you can also set up some kind of a site-to-site VPN so that only the application is accessed from your corporate network into the Azure network, right? So the cloud world, the Microsoft world gives you this different ways of accessing the application, either via the internet or via the private network. It also gives you several options to configure a server, right? So if you're configuring a database server, you need a server with really good storage. If you're configuring a server which the users will use to create some kind of AutoCAD design or building design, then you need a machine which has GPU. That option is available. If you need a simple machine to run a file server, even a machine for that is available. So there are different categories of machines available in the Microsoft Azure world. Uh, and again, a cloud-based simple understands which virtual machine is favorable for which kind of application. For example, if you're running a remote desktop server, there are specific servers in Azure that is optimized for it, and they will help you select based on your requirement, based on the number of users, and help you create those machines. And that machines will eventually sit in a network, and then they will discuss around how do you want to access this? Do you want to access via internet, via VPN, and again, select the right components, right? So all these items form a solution at the end. Now we spoke about network and compute. There's also storage available. Again, different types of storage for different things. Typically, you create disks. So these are your C drives and D drives of machine. You have files. This is your SAN storage. Your blob. This is typically used for your backup storage. Tables and queues are more for application development purposes, right? So Azure provides different types of storages, and based on what your application need is, you can go ahead and select the right storage and build applications of it. So a quick comparison. Now we spoke about network storage and compute. What I want to do quickly is summarize how this actually maps to something that you have or you would have in an on-prem. So typically in an on-prem, this is what you would have. You would have a router followed by a firewall, which then gives access to the backend servers. You have web servers and Active Directory. You might have a load balancer, and then you have application servers and database servers. This is typically an on-prem infrastructure that a lot of customers are used to use and build in their on-prem. When it comes to the cloud world, you can build something very similar to that, right? So building an infrastructure in cloud is no different than building an infrastructure on-prem. But the advantage in cloud is you don't need to stop at building the infrastructure as is in on-prem. You can take it to the next level. You can further add security around it. You can further add advanced functionalities around it, which Azure already provides, right? So this slide, the intent of the slide is to help you understand that you can build whatever you have in Azure, in on-prem, in Azure, and especially if you're using servers which are Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server, SQL Server 2012, which are end of support now. Microsoft comes out with these very attractive offers where if you have these servers running on-prem, you will not receive any security updates. But if you have the same servers running in Azure, you will receive security updates for the next 3 years, right? So there is these advantages that Microsoft provides for running in cloud. And if you also look at from a financial standpoint, running in cloud is also cost effective because you only pay for what you use. If you're a customer who runs 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, kind of Australian business, you don't need to run the servers 24/7, which will save you a lot of cost and time, right? Further, you can put backup, you can put in security around it, you can configure load balancing, you can even, if you want to take it virtual machines to containers or Kubernetes, that is also very much possible within the Azure world. So it gives you that very good transition path from having something running on-prem, moving it to cloud, having a backup in cloud for that infrastructure, building security around it, and then in the future looking at application or further modernizing your infrastructure into serverless, if that may be an option. So what I'll do next is I'll quickly show you a demonstration of Azure, its console, and how you can actually build a server in Azure. And you'll be surprised how quickly we can have this up and running. And if you compare that with an on-prem infrastructure. So let me bring up my Azure instance. Just log into the right account here. Just bear with me for a minute. So this also shows that you need to have a strong password when you're accessing cloud infrastructure. Okay, so this is how the Azure console, if I may say, looks like, right? You can create various services within Azure. If I click on the right-hand top, as you can see, these are some of the most created items that I do. But if I go to all services, I'm sorry, if I go to create, not all services, if I say create resource, as you can see, I can create virtual machine or any of these virtual machines. I can go into blockchain, for example, and create something under the blockchain services. I can go into storage and create different types of storages. So one of the biggest selling point of Microsoft as a vendor, and this is not just Azure, they have been doing this for several years now, is providing a very intuitive user interface, right? They have been always good at providing a user interface that is simple to use. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead, click on create a resource, and let me go ahead and create a virtual machine, right? So I'll click on virtual machine here, and as you can see, it takes me to a very nice wizard, which has very easily understandable options, which I can select and then go ahead and create a virtual machine. So first is subscription. So this is the Azure subscription within which it gets created. I'll use a resource group. So let's say a CMS demo. So resource group, think of resource group as a container, right? So For example, typically resource groups are created if it's a project. So for a project, you create a resource group and everything related to that project is within that resource group. So when you're billing or when you want to know what's the cost of it, it makes it much easier. So I'll say Windows Server, say CMS Windows Server, just to give it a unique name. Now here's the region. Like I said, I can create it in Australia East. I can even go ahead and create it in Poland, for example, right? But of course, if I create it in Poland, the latency is much higher, so it becomes difficult for us to access. But so what I'll do is I'll create an Australia East. Availability options, I can have multiple availability options. This is basically high availability. Do I want to create, do I want to have high availability options for my virtual machine? Security. So Microsoft has now launched or given a feature called trusted virtual machine. So what this means is, in very simple terms, when a virtual machine boots, it goes into the BIOS and then boots. Hackers have now become so intelligent that they can even hack into your BIOS. Trusted virtual machine stops even that. Okay, so I'll choose trusted. Now the image or the operating system I want to have, I can use Windows, Linux, SQL Server on it, Windows 10 on it. So I'll just use, for the sake of demo purposes, Windows Server 2019. Right?
And I don't want people to get too, because this is something that we do in the
Exactly.
background. But yeah, so you don't need to learn how to set up a virtual machine. we can do this for you.
True, true. I completely agree to that. So I'll quickly show you the creation of it. So put in the username and password. The idea of this is just showing you how simple it is, right? How simple the cloud world is. I go to the next one. I select a disk, select a premium disk, standard disk. Next, choose the networking piece. Again, here it gives me a public IP for me to access from the external world. It creates an internal IP range. And again, it gives me options of integrating. Do I want auto shutdown? I want backup. I want guest operating system to be auto updated, right? So all these options are provided. And if I click next and hit create, in a matter of a couple of minutes, I'm able to now create a virtual machine, a Windows Server virtual machine. And this probably took me a couple of minutes. Now imagine this versus you having to buy a additional hardware, order the hardware, order the right operating system, wait for the hardware to be delivered to you, uh, build the network for it, uh, configure the hardware, configure the operating system, install the application, test, and then make it available to your end users. Right? The amount of time it takes when you are running an on-prem infrastructure versus running a cloud infrastructure, you exponentially save a lot of cost and time, right? And as you can see, your deployment is already complete, right? So now I can actually go to the resource and access this virtual machine right now, right? So this is as simple as how I showed you. And your Windows Server would be up and running in no time. So that is what I want to quickly cover as part of my session today. I'll just log in and show you the server right here. Let me bring this up here. And as you can see, I'm now currently logged on to the new server, which I created, CMS Windows Server. It is all up and running. So in a matter of a couple of minutes, I have the infrastructure up and running, a Windows Server. Now I'm logged in, I can install applications and continue to do my job. Okay. So let me jump back to the slides, and that pretty much brings me to the end of my session. Right? I hope I was able to give you some clarity in terms of what Azure is, what it does, and how it works. Um, Again, as Ingram, we work very closely with CMS to provide these services to you. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact Gavin and his team, and we'll be more than happy to assist you in that. Given over to you.